It started with a notification, a simple alert on my phone at 3:17 a.m. $50,000 transfer authorized from joint savings account. My heart stopped as I stared at the screen, the harsh blue light illuminating my face in the darkness. Rebecca was sleeping soundly beside me, or at least pretending to. What she didn't remember in her carefully orchestrated deception was that I wasn't just her husband of 8 years. I was the regional security director at the very bank where we kept our life savings. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Daniel Mitchell. Until 3 weeks ago, I thought I had everything figured out. A comfortable home in the suburbs of Portland, a rewarding career in banking security that I'd built over 15 years, and a marriage I believed was as solid as the reinforced vault doors I helped design protocols for Rebecca and I met during my early days at Sentinel Financial. She worked in client relations, smart, captivating, with a laugh that could fill a room. We dated for 2 years before I proposed on a weekend trip to the Oregon coast. The way her eyes lit up when I dropped to one knee is still etched in my memory, a perfect moment that I revisited often during our 8 years together. Our life had a comfortable rhythm to it. Weekday mornings started with coffee on the back deck, watching the fog lift from the Douglas firs that lined our property. Rebecca would leaf through design magazines. She ran her own interior design business, while I checked security. Reports from the bank's overnight systems. Weekends were for hiking the Cascades or entertaining friends with Rebecca's impressive dinner parties. We weren't perfect, but we were good. At least, that's what I thought. My position at Sentinel Financial had evolved over the years. What started as an entry-level security analyst role had grown into overseeing digital security for the entire Pacific Northwest region. I monitored suspicious activity patterns, implemented protocols for protecting client assets, and trained staff to recognize potential threats. The irony that I couldn't recognize the threat in my own home isn't lost on me. "You're being paranoid again," Rebecca would tease whenever I insisted on complex passwords for our home devices or suggested separate accounts for online purchases. "Not everyone is trying to steal our information, Dan, but 15 years in, banking security teaches you that threats don't always look dangerous. Sometimes they look familiar, trusted, even loved." That particular Tuesday had been unremarkable. I attended budget meetings, reviewed security reports, and left work at a reasonable hour. Rebecca had texted that she would be home late. A new client in Lake Oswego needed emergency consultation on a renovation. It wasn't unusual. Her business had been thriving lately, with more clients than she could reasonably handle. "Don't wait up," her message read. "Might be a long one." I made a simple dinner, caught up on some reading, and was in bed by 11. The house felt particularly empty that night, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of the wooden floors cooling in the night air and the distant hooting of an owl in the woods behind our property. Sleep came easily enough, but something pulled me from it just after 3 in the morning. At first, I thought I'd heard Rebecca come home, but the house was still silent. Then my phone buzzed on the nightstand, once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Years of being on call for security breaches had conditioned me to respond immediately to notifications at odd hours. The screen was painfully bright in the darkness of our bedroom. I squinted, waiting for my eyes to adjust, then felt my stomach drop as I read the automated security alert from Sentinel's system. $50,000 transfer authorized from Mitchell Joint Savings, account number 4528, to external account number 7762 at First Western. Bank time 03:14 a.m. Device ID, Mitchell Home Desktop. Verification, SMS code to primary account holder. My first thought was fraud. Someone had hacked our account. But the device ID stopped me cold. The transfer had been initiated from our home computer downstairs in the study, and the SMS verification had gone to my phone, which meant I checked my message history. No verification code. The secondary authentication had been sent to Rebecca's phone, not mine, $50,000. Almost half of our savings transferred in the middle of the night to an account I didn't recognize. My security training kicked in immediately. I logged into the bank's employee portal through my secure work phone, bypassing the normal customer interface to access the detailed transaction information. The transfer was scheduled, not immediate. Standard procedure for large amounts. The funds would be held for 48 hours before releasing to the external account, ostensibly to prevent fraud. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. The destination account belonged to someone named Michael Thornton at First Western Bank. The name meant nothing to me, but a quick search through Rebecca's contacts, a boundary I'd never crossed before, revealed a Mike T saved with just a phone number, no email or other details. The contact had been created 3 months ago. I sat in the dark, phone in hand, trying to make sense of it all. Rebecca was still not home, despite it being nearly 3:30 a.m. The transfer had been initiated from our house. The recipient was someone she had in her contacts but had never mentioned to me. The logical conclusions were painful, but my training wouldn't allow me to jump to them without evidence. I needed to be methodical, to gather information before confronting what increasingly looked like a betrayal of everything we'd built together. I moved quietly downstairs to our study. The desktop computer was in sleep mode, but the chair was askew as if someone had left in a hurry. I woke the machine, finding it still logged into Rebecca's user account. The browser history had been cleared. Another red flag from someone who usually never bothered with such precautions, but the bank's login page was still in the cache. As I stood there in our darkened study, surrounded by framed photos of our vacations and family gatherings, a car's headlights swept across the front windows. Rebecca was home. I quickly put the computer back to sleep and moved to the kitchen, pretending to get a glass of water. The front door opened, and she entered, quietly, clearly trying not to wake me. When she saw me standing in the kitchen, she startled slightly. "Dan, you scared me," she said, her voice casual but her eyes watchful. "What are you doing up at this hour?" I studied her for a moment. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and she wore the same outfit from this morning, a cream blouse and charcoal pencil skirt, but something about her seemed different. There was a guardedness to her posture that I'd never noticed before. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, watching her reaction carefully. "How was the client meeting?" "Exhausting," she sighed, setting down her purse and design portfolio on the counter. "These last-minute renovations are always so stressful. The client kept changing their mind about everything." She moved to the refrigerator, avoiding my gaze as she poured herself a glass of water. In 15 years of security work, I'd learned to recognize the subtle signs of deception, the avoidance of eye contact, the unnecessary details in explanations, the slight change in vocal patterns. Rebecca was showing all of them. "You must be tired," I said, deciding not to confront her yet. "Let's get some sleep." She nodded, seemingly relieved that I wasn't asking more questions. As we climbed the stairs together, I noticed she kept her phone clutched tightly in her hand, another unusual behavior for someone who typically tossed it carelessly onto any available surface. In bed, she turned away from me, claiming exhaustion. I lay awake beside her, listening to her breathing pattern, knowing from years of sharing a bed that she was only pretending to sleep. My mind raced through possibilities, each more painful than the last. $50,000 to Michael Thornton. A late night. Transfer from our joint savings. A secretive late return home. The puzzle pieces were aligning into a picture I didn't want to see, but my training wouldn't let me look away from. As the first light of dawn filtered through our bedroom curtains, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Rebecca immediately. I would approach this like any other security investigation, methodically gathering evidence, documenting patterns, and building a complete picture before taking action. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What Rebecca didn't realize, what she had somehow forgotten in her careful planning, was that she had chosen the worst possible person to deceive. Not just because I was her husband, but because I was Daniel Mitchell, the man whose entire career was built on identifying, tracking, and stopping financial deception. The irony was almost painful. In all our years together, I had protected countless strangers from fraud and theft, secured millions in assets against sophisticated attacks, only to find the most significant breach of trust happening within my own home, executed by the person I had sworn to love and protect. As Rebecca finally drifted into genuine sleep beside me, I made a silent promise to myself. I would uncover the full truth, whatever it might be, and if my suspicions proved correct, I would make sure that the $50,000 transfer became the most expensive mistake of her life. The game had begun, and Rebecca had no idea she was playing against a master. Sleep evaded me for the remainder of that night. I lay beside Rebecca, listening to her breathing, watching the sunrise gradually illuminate our bedroom through the gaps in the curtains. The woman sleeping next to me suddenly felt like a stranger. Someone wearing my wife's face but harboring secrets I couldn't begin to fathom. When my alarm finally rang at 6:30 a.m., I went through the motions of our morning routine. Coffee brewed, toast made, casual conversation about the weather and upcoming weekend plans. Rebecca seemed normal, perhaps a little tired, but otherwise her usual self. She mentioned a client meeting downtown at 10, kissed me on the cheek, and left the house by 8:15. I waited 15 minutes to ensure she wouldn't return for something forgotten, then began my investigation in earnest. First, I accessed our joint account through my secure work portal. The transfer to Michael Thornton was still pending, scheduled to complete in approximately 43 hours. I flagged it internally with a security hold code that only senior managers could override, buying myself time without alerting Rebecca. Next, I turned to our home computer. Rebecca had always been technologically casual, rarely clearing histories or using private browsing. This carelessness now worked in my favor. While she had cleared the browser history, she hadn't emptied the cache or deleted cookies. Using recovery tools I normally employed for security forensics, I reconstructed her recent online activity. What emerged was troubling. Frequent visits to a real estate website, specifically rental properties in Vancouver, not Vancouver, Washington, but Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, international, beyond easy reach of extradition. Email fragments revealed conversations with someone whose address was mathornton@westcoastar.com. The exchanges were mostly deleted, but cached snippets contained phrases like "new start" and "after everything's finalized." Most damning was a recovered flight itinerary from her email trash folder, 2 one-way tickets to Vancouver, departing in 3 days. 2 tickets. Rebecca Mitchell and Michael Thornton. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a brief affair. This was premeditated, planned. My wife was preparing to leave the country with another man and $50,000 of our joint savings. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to think like a security analyst rather than a betrayed husband. Emotion would only cloud my judgment. I needed more information about this Michael Thornton. A social media search yielded results quickly. Michael Thornton, 36, architect at West Coast Architectural Solutions. His profile showed a tall, dark-haired man with the kind of casual confidence that comes from old money and Ivy League education. His posts revealed a passion for sailing and modern design. Nothing explicitly connected him to Rebecca, but several. of his recent photos featured Vancouver harbors and high-rise apartments. I dug deeper. Property records showed he'd recently sold a condo in Portland's Pearl District. His credit report, accessed through channels I'd rather not detail, revealed a man with significant assets but also substantial debt. Designer clothes, luxury vehicles, and frequent travel had apparently stretched even his considerable architect's salary. The picture was becoming clearer, but I needed to understand the connection to Rebecca. How long had this been going on? How had they met? I thought back over the past few months, searching for signs I might have missed. Rebecca had taken on several new clients since spring, including a renovation project for a downtown architectural firm. She'd been working later hours, attending more client dinners, and had recently upgraded her wardrobe with designer pieces she claimed were necessary for projecting the right image to upscale clients. I checked her design firm's client records. Another boundary crossed, but I was beyond caring about such ethical niceties now. There it was. West Coast Architectural Solutions had hired Mitchell Interior Design 4 months ago to renovate their Portland office. The primary contact listed was Michael Thornton. 4 months. While I had been working late nights securing the bank's new encrypted transaction system, Rebecca had been falling into the arms of a debt-ridden architect with expensive taste. The painful irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been protecting other people's money while my own was being targeted. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Meeting running long. Lunch with client, then consultation in Lake Oswego. Don't wait on dinner. Love you. Each word felt like a knife twist. The casual love you appended to a message that was almost certainly a cover for spending time with Michael. I didn't respond immediately, not trusting myself to maintain the pretense of normalcy. Instead, I returned to my investigation. The $50,000 was troubling enough, but I needed to know if there had been other financial irregularities. I pulled our credit card statements for the past 6 months, scrutinizing every charge. Most seemed legitimate, but patterns emerged that raised red flags. Charges at restaurants, on evenings when Rebecca claimed to be working late, a weekend spa retreat in Cannon Beach that coincided with a professional development workshop she'd mentioned attending. Small but consistent cash withdrawals, $200 here, $300 there, accumulating to nearly $8,000 over the past 3 months. More disturbing were the recent purchases. High-end luggage from Nordstrom, a new laptop, several items from high-end clothing stores. She was preparing for her new life, piece by piece, right under my nose. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of these discoveries pressing down on me like a physical force. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was calculated, methodical, planned over months. Rebecca had been systematically extracting herself from our life together while maintaining a perfect facade of normalcy, and she had nearly succeeded. But she had made one critical miscalculation. Of all the men in Portland she could have betrayed, she chose the one whose entire professional existence revolved around detecting exactly this kind of deception. The regional security director of the very bank she was attempting to use for her escape fund. As the reality of her betrayal solidified, something shifted inside me. The initial shock and pain began to crystallize into something colder, more focused. This wasn't just about a failing marriage or infidelity anymore. This was about justice. I needed to understand the full scope of their plan before deciding how to respond. If the timeline held, Rebecca and Michael intended to leave the country in 3 days with $50,000 of our money. But was that the extent of it? People running away together typically need more than a one-time cash infusion, especially given Michael's apparent lifestyle expectations. I returned to the bank's systems, this time looking beyond our joint accounts. Rebecca had a personal checking account and credit card that predated our marriage. As her spouse, I technically had no right to access these. But as the bank's security director, I had tools at my disposal that circumvented normal privacy protocols. What I found confirmed my growing suspicions. Over the past 2 months, Rebecca had taken out a personal loan for $30,000, claiming it was for expanding her design business. She had also maxed out her personal credit card on cash advances, another $15,000. Combined with the attempted transfer from our joint savings, she was gathering nearly $100,000 for her new life with Michael, a life that didn't include me. I closed my laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the carefully landscaped backyard we had designed together. During our 2nd year of marriage, the Japanese maple we'd planted to commemorate our 5th anniversary was in full autumn color, its red leaves bright against the gray Oregon sky. 8 years of marriage, countless shared moments, dreams, plans for the future, all apparently meaningless to Rebecca compared to whatever Michael Thornton offered. Was it passion, the allure of something new, or simply the attraction of his seemingly sophisticated lifestyle? Whatever her reasons, she had set this plan in motion, and it was nearly complete. In 3 days, she would be gone, taking a substantial portion of our financial life with her, leaving me to pick up the pieces of our shattered marriage. Unless I stopped her. I returned to my laptop, a plan beginning to form in my mind. Rebecca had forgotten, or perhaps never fully understood, exactly what my position at Sentinel Financial entailed. She knew I worked in security, but she had always glazed over when I tried to explain the technical aspects of my job. What she didn't grasp was that as regional security director, I didn't just monitor suspicious activity, I controlled the entire security infrastructure of the bank's Northwest operations. Account freezes, transfer authorizations, fraud investigations, all fell under my purview. I had systems at my disposal that could trace financial movements across institutions, flag accounts for enhanced scrutiny, and even coordinate with financial crimes units in law enforcement. Rebecca thought she was cleverly maneuvering around normal banking safeguards. She had no idea she was actually moving pieces on a board where I could see every square, predict every move, and ultimately control the outcome. I sent a reply to her text. "No problem. Busy day at the bank anyway. Love you too." Then I began setting the pieces in place for what would become the most important security operation of my career, not protecting the bank's millions, but reclaiming my own life from the woman who thought she could simply take what she wanted and disappear. Rebecca had made her move. Now it was my turn. That evening, Rebecca returned home just after 8 p.m. She smelled faintly of unfamiliar cologne and expensive restaurants. Her explanation about the client meeting flowed easily, complete with details about fabric selections and lighting challenges. She'd always been a convincing liar. I just hadn't realized I'd been her primary audience for months. "How was your day?" she asked, kicking off her heels and pouring herself a glass of the Pinot Noir we'd brought back from Willamette Valley last year. "Our anniversary trip." "Interesting," I replied truthfully. "Had to deal with some suspicious activity on a high-value account." Her hand paused imperceptibly as she lifted the wine glass. "Oh, nothing too serious, I hope." "Hard to say yet. Someone attempting to move substantial funds internationally. Could be legitimate, could be fraud." I watched her face carefully. "You know how it is. People think they're being clever, but there's always a digital trail." She took a long sip. "Of wine. Well, that's why they pay you the big bucks, right? To catch the bad guys." Her laugh was only slightly strained. "Something like that," I smiled, raising my own glass in a toast. "To justice." She clinked glasses with me, her eyes never quite meeting mine. "To justice." After dinner, Rebecca claimed exhaustion and went to bed early. I waited until her breathing indicated sleep, then returned to my investigation. While she'd been sharing details of her fictional client meeting, I had been refining my understanding of her actual plans. The flight information had been the key. Armed with the confirmation number from her deleted emails, I accessed the airline system and reviewed the reservation details. The tickets had been purchased with Rebecca's personal credit card, the one she had recently maxed out with cash advances. Their itinerary was more extensive than I initially thought. Vancouver was just the first stop. Connecting flights would take them to the Cayman Islands, a destination conveniently known for its banking privacy and limited extradition. This wasn't just an impulsive affair. It was a calculated escape plan with financial motivations. The revelation hit me with stunning clarity. Rebecca and Michael weren't just running away together, they were attempting to disappear entirely, beyond the reach of American financial institutions and legal jurisdictions. But why? What was driving this extreme measure? I dug deeper into Michael Thornton's background, utilizing resources that straddled the line between professional due diligence and invasion of privacy. His architectural firm, while prestigious, was apparently struggling. Recent projects had gone significantly over budget, and client complaints had begun to surface about delays and quality issues. More importantly, Michael was being investigated by the state licensing board for potential violations related to building code approvals. Nothing had been proven yet, but if the investigation went against him, his career would be effectively over. He needed to disappear before the final ruling, expected within the month. Rebecca, it seemed, had hitched her wagon to a falling star, one desperate enough to grab any lifeline, including a married interior designer with access to substantial funds. The question remained, did she know the truth about Michael's situation? Was she a victim of his manipulation or a willing accomplice? The answer came at 2:14 a.m., when Rebecca's phone lit up with a text message notification. She had left. It charging on her nightstand, screen facing up, another careless mistake from someone planning a criminal escape. From my side of the bed, I could see Michael's name and the first line of the message. Everything set with the accounts in Grand Cayman. We need to move fast before... The rest was cut off, but it was enough. Rebecca wasn't being manipulated. She was a full partner in this scheme. Whatever Michael was running from, licensing issues, debt, possibly worse, Rebecca had decided his problems were worth abandoning our 8-year marriage for. Worth stealing nearly $100,000 for. I lay awake for the remainder of the night, the full revelation of her betrayal settling into my bones like a cold poison. By morning, grief had hardened into resolve. This wasn't just about saving my money anymore, it was about ensuring that actions had consequences. The next day proceeded with the same charade of normalcy. Rebecca mentioned another full day of client meetings. I nodded and smiled, wishing her a productive day. As soon as she left, I put the next phase of my plan into action. First, I contacted Sentinel Financial's legal department, speaking directly with our chief counsel, Valerie Harmon. We had worked together on numerous fraud cases over the years, and I considered her a friend as well as a colleague. Val, I need your advice on a sensitive matter, I began, keeping my voice professional despite the personal nature of the situation. I'm listening, she replied, her tone indicating she recognized the gravity in my voice. I laid out the situation. In clear, unemotional terms, the unauthorized transfer attempt, the evidence of planned flight, the combined financial moves indicating intent to permanently relocate funds outside U.S. jurisdiction. I left out the personal elements initially, focusing on the financial crimes aspects. This sounds like a clear case for law enforcement involvement, Valerie said. Have you identified the account holders? The moment of truth had arrived. Yes, the primary account belongs to me and my wife, Rebecca Mitchell. She initiated the transfer to an account belonging to Michael Thornton, apparently planning to leave the country with him in 2 days. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. Dan, I'm so sorry. This complicates things considerably. I know it does. That's why I called you first. I need to handle this correctly, both professionally and personally. What Followed was a detailed conversation about my options. As both an account holder and a bank employee in a position of financial oversight, I walked a delicate line. Valerie advised caution, particularly regarding accessing Rebecca's personal accounts, but confirmed that protecting the joint assets was both my right and, given my position, my responsibility. Document everything, she emphasized. Every transfer attempt, every piece of evidence regarding intent. If this escalates to criminal charges, and it likely will if they've been planning to move these funds offshore, you'll need a clear record showing you acted to prevent fraud, not out of personal revenge. After ending the call with Valerie, I implemented a series of carefully calibrated financial measures. I placed an enhanced security freeze on our joint savings account, citing suspicious activity patterns. This would prevent any transfers for 7 to 10 business days, well beyond Rebecca's planned departure date. I contacted First Western Bank's security department as a professional courtesy, alerting them to potential fraudulent activity involving Michael Thornton's account. I didn't provide specific details, merely flagged the account for enhanced monitoring. I transferred half of our remaining joint funds, money I had legitimately earned, to a new secure account under my name only. This was both legally and ethically justifiable. I wasn't taking Rebecca's money, merely protecting my own. Most importantly, I initiated a formal investigation flag in our system. This would create an automatic alert if Rebecca attempted any additional financial maneuvers through Sentinel Financial. The flag would also trigger notification to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network if she attempted to move significant sums internationally. By noon, I had effectively closed all obvious financial avenues for Rebecca and Michael's escape plan. The $50,000 transfer was suspended indefinitely. Their access to additional funds was severely limited, and most importantly, any further attempts would create an immediate paper trail visible to regulatory authorities. But I wasn't done. These measures addressed the financial aspects, but not the personal betrayal. For that, I needed more than administrative actions. I needed irrefutable evidence of their plans, their motivations, and the extent of their deception. I called in a personal day from work, something I rarely did. Then I drove to West Coast Architectural Solutions' downtown office. Parking across the street, I settled in to wait, unsure exactly what I was hoping to see, but knowing I needed to understand. The relationship at the center of this betrayal. At 12:30 p.m., my patience was rewarded. Rebecca emerged from the building's glass doors, laughing, her hand comfortably resting on Michael Thornton's arm. He was exactly as his social media photos had shown. Tall, dark-haired, expensively dressed. They walked to a nearby luxury restaurant, clearly comfortable with each other, moving with the easy intimacy of established lovers. I took photos with my phone documenting their meeting. Not because I needed proof of infidelity, that was now the least of my concerns, but because every piece of evidence strengthened the case I was building. A case that would soon demonstrate to Rebecca exactly how monumentally she had miscalculated. After lunch, they returned to the architectural office together. I waited another hour, then approached the building. Using my Sentinel Financial business card and a story about reviewing security for a potential loan to the firm, I gained access to their reception area. "I'm so sorry, but Mr. Thornton isn't available right now," the receptionist informed me after checking her calendar. "He's in a private meeting with a design consultant." "No problem," I smiled. "I actually have some documents he might find useful regarding the financing options. Could I leave them on his desk?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I suppose that would be fine. His office is down the hall, last door on the right. The door should be open if he's not in there." I thanked her and walked confidently down the hallway. Heart pounding, but expression neutral. Michael's office door was indeed open. I stepped inside, quickly scanning the contemporary space. His desk was organized, with architectural drawings spread across its surface. A framed license on the wall confirmed his credentials. Credentials that might soon be revoked if the licensing investigation went against him. A calendar on his computer screen showed multiple appointments deleted for the coming weeks, with a single notation for the day after tomorrow, YVR 10:45, Vancouver International Airport. Their departure. I didn't leave any documents. There weren't any to leave. Instead, I took several discreet photos of his office, including the calendar notation. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A small jewelry box, partially, hidden behind a stack of files. Driven by an impulse I couldn't quite name, I opened it. Inside was a platinum ring with a substantial diamond, clearly an engagement ring. The attached receipt showed it had been purchased 3 days ago. The final piece clicked into place. Rebecca wasn't just leaving me, she was immediately replacing me. Perhaps even planning a new marriage once in the Caymans, completing her transformation. From Rebecca Mitchell, interior designer from Portland, to whatever new identity she planned to assume. I closed the box and left it exactly where I'd found it, then walked calmly out of the office. The receptionist smiled as I passed. "Did you find everything all right?" "I found exactly what I was looking for," I replied truthfully. "Thank you for your help." Back in my car, I reviewed the evidence I'd gathered. Their relationship was clearly established and serious. Their departure was imminent. They had gone to extraordinary lengths to secure funds for their new life, and they had no idea I knew everything. That evening, when Rebecca returned home, I maintained the same facade of normalcy we'd been living behind. We discussed dinner plans, shared anecdotes about our days, her fabricated stories about client meetings, my carefully edited account of bank business, and watched a movie together on the couch, when she curled against me, her head on my shoulder as we had sat countless evenings before. I felt nothing but a cold certainty about what needed to happen next. The woman beside me was a stranger wearing my wife's face, telling me she loved me while actively planning to destroy our life together. Tomorrow would bring the next phase of my response. The revelation was complete. I understood the full scope of their plan, the depth of their deception, and the urgency of their timeline. Now it was time to show Rebecca exactly who she was dealing with. Morning arrived with a heavy fog blanketing our neighborhood, the moisture clinging to everything like a physical manifestation of the suffocating secrets hanging between Rebecca and me. She woke early, claimed another day of client consultations, and left with a cheerful wave and a promise to be home for dinner. "It's our last chance for a nice evening together before my conference trip this weekend," she said, referencing the interior design symposium in Seattle she had fabricated as cover for her actual trip to Vancouver. "I thought maybe we could open that bottle of Barolo we've been saving." I smiled and agreed, marveling at her composure. The Barolo had been a gift from her parents on our last anniversary, a wine meant to be aged for special occasions. The irony of using it to commemorate what she planned as our final evening together wasn't lost on me. After she left, I sat at our kitchen table and fully assessed what was at stake in this unfolding drama. This wasn't just about money anymore, though the financial aspects were significant. This was about justice, consequences, and perhaps most importantly, ensuring that Rebecca and Michael understood exactly how profoundly they had miscalculated. The financial stakes were straightforward. $50,000 from our joint savings, $30,000 from Rebecca's personal loan, and $15,000 in credit card cash advances, nearly $100,000 in total, a substantial sum that represented years of careful saving and financial discipline on my part. But the true stakes extended far beyond dollars and cents. This was about the deliberate destruction of a shared life. 8 years of marriage casually discarded. Trust violated at the most fundamental level. A future we had planned together. The children we'd discussed having within the next year. The vacation home in Bend we'd been saving for. The retirement plans we'd mapped out. All unilaterally abandoned without so much as a conversation. I thought about the people who would be affected by Rebecca's actions. Her parents, who had embraced me as a son. My family, who considered her a daughter. Our mutual friends, who would be blindsided by her disappearance. The clients of her interior design business, left with projects half completed and deposits unrefunded. The wider implications were equally concerning. If Rebecca and Michael succeeded in their plan, they wouldn't just be leaving with our money. They would potentially be establishing a precedent, a blueprint for others to follow. Drain shared resources, flee to a non-extradition location, start fresh without consequences. As someone who had dedicated his career to maintaining the integrity of financial systems, I couldn't allow that to happen. This wasn't just personal, it was professional. My entire working life had been built around ensuring that financial crimes had appropriate consequences. I pulled out a legal pad and began mapping out exactly what Rebecca and Michael stood to lose if their plan failed. For Rebecca, the list was extensive. Her marriage and the stability it provided, her professional reputation in a field where word of mouth and references were essential, her relationship with family and friends, her credit standing and financial future. In the United States, potentially her freedom. If the financial maneuvers crossed from unethical to illegal, for Michael, the stakes were even higher. His architectural license was already in jeopardy. Adding financial fraud and international flight to avoid investigation would effectively end any chance of rehabilitation. He would be trading a temporary professional setback for permanent career destruction. Their plan, I realized, wasn't just immoral, it was short-sighted. Even if they successfully reached the Caymans with the money, what then? $100,000 might seem substantial, but it wouldn't sustain their lifestyle indefinitely, especially given Michael's apparent taste for luxury. Eventually, they would need to work, to establish new professional identities, to build a sustainable future. All of this assumed, of course, that their relationship would withstand the pressures of starting over in a foreign country, cut off from their support networks, possibly facing ongoing legal concerns. The engagement ring suggested they believed it would, or at least Michael was committed to creating that impression. I wondered if Rebecca truly understood what she was giving up. Did she comprehend the finality of the choice she was making? Had she considered the long-term implications beyond the initial excitement of escape and reinvention? My contemplation was interrupted by a notification on my phone. It was an automatic alert from our security system at Sentinel Financial. Rebecca had just attempted to access our joint savings account online. Likely checking on the status of the $50,000 transfer, she would have discovered it flagged for security review. I watched in real time as she navigated through various account screens, probably searching for an explanation. Then came the inevitable, a call to the bank's customer service line. I could track this too. All calls were logged in our system, with notes from customer service representatives. The call lasted 6 minutes and 14 seconds. The representative, following standard protocol, explained that the transfer had been flagged by the security system due to unusual activity patterns and would require additional verification. When Rebecca pressed for details, she was told that someone from the security department would contact her, that someone would typically be me or a member of my team. 15 minutes later, Rebecca called my direct office line, something she rarely did during business hours. "Sentinel Financial, Daniel Mitchell speaking," I answered, my voice professionally neutral. "Dan, it's me," Rebecca said, a note of controlled panic in her voice. "I'm having an issue with our account. There's a hold on that transfer I was making for the kitchen renovation." "The kitchen renovation?" Her cover story for the $50,000 transfer. Another lie to add to the growing collection. "Oh," I replied, allowing concern to enter my tone. "That's strange. What are they saying about it?" "Just some nonsense about security, and protocols and verification. I need that money transferred today for the contractor deposits. Can you help expedite it? Pull some strings with your security team." I paused, pretending to consider. It's probably just the amount triggering automatic flags. Transfers over $10,000 get additional scrutiny these days. Let me look into it when I get back to the office. I'm actually off-site at a meeting right now. "Dan, this is important," she insisted, her composure slipping slightly. "The contractors need the deposit today, or we lose our place in their schedule." "I understand," I assured her. "I'll make it a priority when I get back. In the meantime, have you tried using your personal account as a stopgap, just to hold the contractors until we sort this out?" There was a telling pause. "My personal account is tied up in other investments right now. This transfer really needs to happen today, Dan. I'll do what I can," I promised, "but you know how these security protocols work. They're designed to be difficult to circumvent, even for employees. That's the whole point." After a few more minutes of reassurances, Rebecca ended the call, clearly frustrated but trying not to show it. I could almost see her mind racing, calculating alternate approaches, assessing how this security hold might impact their carefully orchestrated departure. What she couldn't know was that the hold wasn't going to be lifted. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. The money she had counted on for their new life was effectively frozen. My phone buzzed again almost immediately. This time, it was a text from an unfamiliar number. "Rebecca gave me your contact. This is Michael Thornton from West Coast Architectural. We really need that transfer process today for the kitchen project. Anything you can do to help would be greatly appreciated." The audacity was breathtaking. Michael, the man sleeping with my wife and planning to flee the country with her, was actually contacting me directly, attempting to use his professional persona to pressure me into releasing the funds they intended to steal. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I forwarded it to Valerie in legal, adding it to our growing documentation of their scheme. Next, I called the airline and cancelled Rebecca's ticket to Vancouver, using the emergency access code from her email. The system asked if I wanted to notify the traveler of the cancellation. I declined. Let her arrive at the airport tomorrow, ready to flee, only to discover another piece of her plan unraveling. As the afternoon progressed, I received reports of additional attempts by Rebecca to access various financial accounts. She tried to increase the cash advance limit on her maxed-out credit card. She called about expediting the personal loan she'd taken out. She even attempted to access my personal checking account, an account she had no legitimate reason to use. Each attempt was documented, each one strengthening the case against her. By 4 p.m., she had made no fewer than 17 distinct financial maneuvers, growing increasingly desperate as each avenue closed. At 4:23 p.m., she called me again. "Dan, I hate to bother you, but have you had a chance to look into that transfer issue?" "I'm working on it," I assured her, "but it looks like it might be more complicated than I thought." The security flag was triggered by multiple factors: unusual amount, time of transaction, destination account lacking prior transaction history with us, standard anti-fraud measures. But you can override those, right? You're the security director. "It's not that simple," I explained patiently. "Even I can't unilaterally clear a transaction with this many red flags. It requires multiple department approvals, documentation of legitimate purpose. It's a process designed specifically to prevent internal manipulation." The irony of explaining anti-fraud measures to someone actively attempting fraud wasn't lost on me. "How long will this process take?" she asked, her voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "Hard to say. Could be a few days, could be longer. These things move at their own pace." Days! The panic in her voice was now unmistakable. Dan, that's not acceptable. We need that money now. I allowed a note of suspicion to enter my voice. Rebecca, what's really going on here? You've never been this concerned about financial timing before. And since when is a kitchen renovation? So urgent it can't wait a few days. She backpedaled immediately, her voice softening. I'm sorry, you're right. I'm just stressed about keeping these contractors. You know how hard it was to get them scheduled. But you're right, a few days won't be the end of the world. Do what you can, okay? Of course, I reassured her. And I'll see you tonight for dinner, right? Looking forward to opening that Barolo. Absolutely, she confirmed, her voice now carefully controlled. I'll pick up some cheese to go with it on my way home. After ending the call, I sat back and considered the day's developments. Rebecca was clearly beginning to panic as her financial avenues closed one by one. The timeline was tightening. Their flight was scheduled for tomorrow morning, but the funds they were counting on remained frustratingly out of reach. What would they do? Abandon the plan entirely? Modify it to account for reduced funds? Attempt to delay until they could secure alternative financing? Whatever their next move, I was now several steps ahead. The security hold on our joint account wouldn't be lifted. Rebecca's ticket had been cancelled, and most importantly, a complete record of their activities was being compiled, documenting every desperate attempt to access funds for their escape. The stakes were clear. Rebecca and Michael had gambled everything on this plan succeeding. Their professional reputations, their financial futures, potentially even their freedom, all rested on their ability to secure those funds and board that flight tomorrow. They were about to discover how completely they had lost that gamble. As I prepared to return home for our special dinner, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The initial shock and pain of Rebecca's betrayal had been replaced by something colder and more focused. The absolute certainty that actions have consequences, and that Rebecca was about to face hers. Tonight would be our last dinner together. As husband and wife, that much of her plan would proceed as intended, but it would not proceed on her terms. The Barolo would be opened. Truths would be poured alongside it. And by morning, Rebecca would understand exactly how catastrophically she had miscalculated when she chose to betray the one man who controlled the very systems she was attempting to exploit. I arrived home at 6:30 p.m., carrying a bottle of expensive Cabernet to complement the Barolo that Rebecca had mentioned. If this was to be our last dinner together, though not in the way she planned, I might as well ensure we had options. The house was filled with the aroma of cooking when I entered. Rebecca had prepared my favorite meal, herb-crusted salmon, roasted potatoes and asparagus, a peace offering, or simply part of her performance, a final gesture to maintain the illusion of normalcy before her planned departure. "Welcome home," she called from the kitchen, her voice light and casual. If I hadn't spent the day tracking her increasingly desperate financial maneuvers, I might have believed nothing was wrong. "Dinner's almost ready. Why don't you open that Barolo to let it breathe?" I found the bottle already on the counter, alongside. The corkscrew. The Barolo Riserva had been a gift from her parents on our 5th anniversary, a special wine meant to be aged and opened to mark a significant milestone. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd chosen it for what she intended as our final evening together. As I worked the cork free, Rebecca moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, putting final touches on the meal. She wore a burgundy dress I'd always admired, her hair styled the way I preferred it, every detail calculated to present the image of a devoted wife enjoying a special evening with her husband. "Rough day?" I asked, pouring the wine into crystal glasses. "Another. Wedding gift, rarely used." She hesitated almost imperceptibly. "A bit challenging, some client issues, nothing worth discussing over dinner." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. How about you? Any luck with that transfer problem? It's complicated, I replied non-committally. We can talk about it after dinner if you want. But first, let's enjoy this meal you've prepared. It looks amazing. We carried our plates to the dining room table, which Rebecca had set with our best china and candles. The scene was picture perfect, a loving couple celebrating their life together. Only I knew it was the final act of an elaborate deception. As we ate, Rebecca maintained light conversation, asking about my day, sharing sanitized anecdotes about her supposed client meetings. I played along, watching her performance with a detached fascination. How many of our dinners had been like this over the past months? How many conversations had been carefully constructed lies? You know, I said, refilling our wine glasses, I was thinking today about how we met. Do you remember? Rebecca's smile softened. Of course, the bank's holiday party. You spilled champagne on my dress. And insisted on paying for the dry cleaning, I continued. Though you were skeptical when I asked for your number, just to arrange the payment. She laughed, a genuine sound that momentarily pierced the facade. Transparent excuse, but effective. I was so nervous, I admitted. You were this sophisticated, beautiful woman, and I was just a mid-level analyst with a damp napkin trying to salvage your dress. You were sweet, she said, her eyes momentarily distant. Honest, that's what attracted me to you. No games, no pretense. The irony of her words hung between us, unacknowledged. And look at us now, I said, raising my glass in a toast. 8 years later. Rebecca clinked her glass against mine, holding my gaze. 8 years, who would have thought? Indeed, I replied softly. Who would have thought? We finished dinner with the conversation moving to safer topics. A documentary series we'd been watching, news about mutual friends, plans for the garden next spring, plans she had no intention of being present for. After clearing the dishes, Rebecca brought out dessert, a chocolate torte from my favorite bakery downtown, another thoughtful touch in her elaborate goodbye performance. As we enjoyed the dessert, I decided it was time to begin shifting the dynamic. So about that transfer issue, I said casually. It's actually quite an interesting case from a security perspective. Rebecca set down her fork, her expression carefully neutral. Oh? Yes. You see, what caught our attention wasn't just the amount or timing, though those were flags. It was the pattern of activity leading up to it. She took a sip of wine. What do you mean? In fraud investigation, we look for what we call precursor activities, I explained, slipping into my professional tone. Financial behaviors that typically precede a major fraudulent event. Cash advances maxed out, personal loans taken under questionable pretenses, unusual timing of large transfers. Rebecca's knuckles whitened around her wineglass. That sounds very technical. It is, I agreed. But that's what makes my position at Sentinel unique. Most people think banking security is just about firewalls and encryption, but it's really about pattern recognition, understanding human behavior, anticipating what someone might do before they do it. I leaned forward slightly. Did you know that as Regional Security Director, I don't just respond to fraud? I actively prevent it. I have authority to freeze accounts across multiple institutions, flag individuals in international financial monitoring systems, even initiate interbank security protocols that can effectively lock someone out of the entire regulated banking system. Rebecca set down her glass carefully. I didn't realize your position was so powerful. Few people do, I acknowledged. That's part of what makes it effective. Those attempting to manipulate the system rarely understand the tools available to counter them. A flicker of something, concern, fear, crossed her face before she masked it with a smile. Well, it's fascinating, but perhaps a bit heavy for a dinner conversation. You're right, I conceded. Besides, you mentioned having an early start tomorrow. The design conference in Seattle, right? She nodded, visibly relieved at the change of subject. Yes, my flight leaves at 10:45, the same time as her actual scheduled departure to Vancouver. At least that detail hadn't been a lie. Will you need a ride to the airport? I offered. No need, she said quickly. I've arranged for a car service. Didn't want to disrupt your workday. Always thoughtful, I murmured. One of the many things I've always loved about you. We finished dessert with Rebecca, gradually steering the conversation back to safer topics. After clearing the plates, she suggested we move to the living room for a final glass of wine. As we settled onto the couch, Rebecca artfully positioned herself close to me, maintaining the illusion of intimacy. I wondered if she felt any genuine regret about what she was planning, any hesitation about abandoning our shared life. You know, I said, swirling the last of the Barolo in my glass, I've been thinking lately about trust, about how it forms, the foundation of everything meaningful in life. Rebecca nodded, her expression carefully composed. It's essential, especially in marriage, I continued, and in finance, oddly enough. Both systems rely on participants acting in good faith, honoring commitments, maintaining integrity. An interesting parallel, she murmured. When that trust is broken in banking, we have systems to address it. Consequences designed to maintain the integrity of the overall structure. I looked directly at her. I've often wondered what the equivalent would be in a marriage. Rebecca shifted slightly, her discomfort now visible beneath her composed exterior. I imagine open communication would be important. Understanding. Forgiveness, perhaps. Perhaps, I agreed. Though some breaches might be too fundamental for simple forgiveness. Some violations might require more substantial consequences. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. A wedding gift from my parents. Each tick seemed to echo between us, marking the moments until Rebecca's carefully constructed deception would collapse. It's getting late, she said finally, setting down her empty glass, and I still need to finish packing for tomorrow. I nodded, allowing her the escape. Of course, your conference. I hope it's productive. Rebecca stood, smoothing her dress, with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. Thank you for a lovely evening. The wine was perfect. A fitting choice, I replied. For a special occasion. She kissed my cheek lightly before heading upstairs, her performance maintained to the very end. I remained in the living room, listening to her movements above, the careful sounds of packing, not for a professional conference, but for a new life she thought awaited her. What Rebecca didn't understand, what she had somehow forgotten, or never fully grasped, was that she had married not just Daniel Mitchell, the husband, but Daniel Mitchell, the banking security expert. A man whose entire professional existence revolved around identifying, tracking, and stopping exactly the kind of financial deception she was attempting. In her calculated betrayal, she had overlooked the most critical factor. She was trying to exploit a system controlled by the very person she was attempting to deceive. Every account she accessed, every transfer she initiated, every financial maneuver she executed left digital fingerprints that I could not only see but interpret with expert precision. I finished the last of my wine and set the glass down gently. Tomorrow would bring the culmination of Rebecca's plan and the revelation of mine. She believed she held all the cards, that her escape was meticulously arranged down to the last detail. She had no idea what awaited her. I barely slept that night listening to Rebecca's measured breathing beside me. How strange to share a bed with someone planning to abandon you the next day. How surreal to lie next to a stranger wearing your wife's face. At 5:30 a.m., I carefully slipped out of bed. Rebecca stirred, but didn't wake. I showered and dressed in one of my best suits, a charcoal grey Tom Ford that Rebecca had helped select last year, calling it my power suit. Appropriate attire for the day ahead. Downstairs, I prepared coffee and reviewed my strategy one final time. The pieces were in place. Now I needed to execute with precision. First, I called my assistant at Sentinel Financial, instructing her to clear my calendar. Family emergency, I explained. I'll be unavailable most of the day, but reachable by cell for genuine crises. Next, I contacted the bank's chief of corporate security, Martin Winters, a former FBI financial crimes specialist who had become both mentor and friend over the years. Martin, I need a professional courtesy, I began after explaining the situation. In clinical terms, Rebecca will be at Portland International around 10 this morning, attempting to board a flight to Vancouver. Can you arrange for TSA to give her extra attention? Not a problem, Martin replied without hesitation. I still have contacts at the airport. Nothing dramatic, just enough secondary screening to ensure she misses any tight connections. Perfect, I confirmed, and I'd appreciate a notification when she arrives at security. With airport surveillance arranged, I moved to the next phase. I contacted First Western Bank, where Michael Thornton held the account Rebecca had attempted to transfer our money to. Speaking with their security director as a professional courtesy, I detailed the suspicious activity without revealing my personal connection. We have reason to believe this account is being used in a potential fraud scheme, I explained. Unusual transfer patterns, possible attempt to move funds internationally to avoid financial obligations. The security director, recognizing the seriousness of my position, agreed to place a temporary hold on Thornton's account, pending investigation. Standard procedure when potential fraud was identified by another financial institution. With both ends of their financial pipeline now effectively blocked, I turned to documentation. I compiled a comprehensive file, screenshots of the transfer attempt, phone records of Rebecca's frantic calls to various financial institutions, records of her loan application with its questionable stated purpose, and, most damning, the travel itineraries showing their planned route to the Cayman Islands. I made copies, one for my personal records, one for the bank's security files, and one to be delivered to Rebecca at the appropriate moment. Every document was carefully organized, every piece of evidence meticulously labeled. The case against her was airtight. The final element of my strategy involved Michael Thornton. While Rebecca was my primary concern, I couldn't ignore his role in this betrayal. A quick check of his firm's website showed he was scheduled to be in the office this morning for a client meeting before his supposed departure. Perfect timing for an unexpected visitor. By 7:15 a.m., I had completed my preparations. Rebecca was still asleep upstairs, unusual for her, but likely the result of stress and poor sleep. I heard the shower start as I finished my second cup of coffee. The day was beginning. I left a note on the kitchen counter. Early meeting at the bank. Wanted to let you sleep. Have a good trip to Seattle. Call me when you land. Love, Dan. One last performance in our theater of mutual deception. As I drove to downtown Portland, the morning fog was lifting, revealing a clear autumn day. The irony wasn't lost on me. Perfect weather for travel, for new beginnings, for escape. Weather Rebecca and Michael would have appreciated under different circumstances. My first stop was West Coast Architectural Solutions. I arrived just before 8:30 when the receptionist confirmed Michael Thornton was already in his office, preparing for a 9 a.m. client meeting. I don't have an appointment, I acknowledged with a confident smile, handing her my business card, but I'm sure Mr. Thornton will want to speak with me regarding the matter we discussed yesterday. The receptionist, the same young woman who had unknowingly allowed me access to his office the previous day, nodded and picked up the phone. After a brief exchange, she directed me down the hallway. He can give you 15 minutes before his client arrives. Michael's office was as I remembered it, sleek, modern, expressing the cultivated taste of someone who appreciated luxury and wanted others to notice. The man himself rose from behind his desk as I entered, his handshake firm, his smile professional, but cautious. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk, "I didn't realize you were planning to visit in person. I thought we were handling the kitchen renovation finances through Rebecca." I sat down, setting my briefcase on the floor beside me. "That's precisely why I'm here, Mr. Thornton, to discuss finances." His expression remained neutral, but I noticed his right hand move slightly toward his cell phone on the desk. "I'm afraid I don't understand. Is there an issue with the contractor payment?" "In a manner of speaking," I replied, maintaining eye contact. "Though not for the reasons you might think." I removed a folder from my briefcase and placed it on his desk, opening it to reveal the top document, a printout of the $50,000 transfer attempt, complete with timestamps and account details. "You see, there is no kitchen renovation, is there, Michael? Just as there is no design conference in Seattle for Rebecca today. Only a flight to Vancouver, connecting to the Cayman Islands, and nearly $100,000 in stolen funds to finance your new life together." The color drained from his face, but to his credit, Michael maintained his composure. He leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from confusion to calculation. "I'm not sure what Rebecca has told you," he began carefully, "but I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Please," I interrupted, raising a hand, "let's not waste the limited time we have with denials. I've seen the flight bookings. I've tracked the financial maneuvers. I've even seen the engagement ring in your desk drawer. The only misunderstanding here is yours, specifically your profound misunderstanding of who you were dealing with when you decided to involve my wife in financial fraud." Michael's professional facade cracked slightly. "Financial fraud is a serious accusation." "Indeed it is," I agreed, "as is conspiracy to commit wire fraud, illegal transfer of funds across international boundaries to avoid financial obligations, and potential violations of the Bank Secrecy Act, all of which I've documented in detail and shared with the appropriate authorities this morning." I tapped the folder between us. "This is merely a courtesy copy. The originals are already with Sentinel Financial's legal department and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network." Michael swallowed hard, his eyes darting to his phone. "What exactly do you want, Mitchell?" "A fair question," I acknowledged. "I'm not here for revenge, despite what you might think. I'm here because actions have consequences, and it's time for you and Rebecca to face yours." I removed another document from the folder, a printout of Michael's professional license status, showing the pending investigation. "You're already facing potential loss of your architectural license. Adding federal financial crimes would effectively end any chance of professional redemption. Your accounts at First Western have been frozen pending investigation. The flight you planned to take with my wife today will depart without either of you, and any hope of starting fresh with stolen funds has evaporated." Michael stared at me, his expression a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. "You've been several steps ahead this entire time." "That's my job," I replied simply, "identifying financial threats and neutralizing them before they cause damage. Usually I do it for the bank. Today I did it for myself." I closed the folder and returned it to my briefcase. "Rebecca doesn't know I'm here. She's probably packing the last of her things right now, preparing to meet you at the airport. She'll be disappointed." "What happens now?" Michael asked, his voice quieter. "Now? You cancel any remaining plans. You contact Rebecca and tell her. It's over. You focus on addressing the licensing investigation legitimately rather than fleeing from it, and you stay away from my wife." "And if I refuse?" I stood, straightening my jacket. "Then the detailed evidence I've compiled goes directly to the FBI, the state licensing board, and every architectural firm in the Pacific Northwest. Your choice." Michael stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You've made your point. Good. I'll see myself out. You have a client arriving soon, I believe. As I reached the door, Michael called after me. She really does love me, you know. It wasn't just about the money. I paused, hand on the doorknob. For your sake, I hope that's true. Because the money is gone, and now she'll need something to console her for everything else she's about to lose. I left Michael staring at his desk, the carefully constructed future he'd planned with Rebecca visibly crumbling around him. One down, one to go. Back in my car, I received a text from Martin at TSA security. Subject arrived at airport, secondary screening initiated, flight departs in 75 minutes. The stage was set for the final act. Rebecca had arrived at the airport, unaware that her carefully orchestrated escape plan had already unraveled. Michael would not be joining her. Not today, not ever. The money she counted on was inaccessible, and I was now driving toward Portland International to deliver the final revelation personally. As I navigated through morning traffic, I felt no triumph, no vindication. Only a cold certainty that what I was doing was necessary, not just for me, but for the principle that deception on this scale cannot and should not go unanswered. Rebecca had forgotten who I was when she crafted her plan. She had overlooked the most fundamental aspect of my identity, not just as her husband, but as someone whose entire professional existence was dedicated to preventing exactly the type of financial deception she had attempted. It was time to remind her, in terms she couldn't possibly misunderstand. Portland International Airport buzzed with the usual morning activity as I navigated through the main terminal. Business travelers hurrying to make connections, families corralling excited children, airport staff directing the controlled chaos with practiced efficiency. Amid it all, Rebecca would be waiting at her gate, checking her watch, wondering why Michael hadn't arrived yet. I received another text from Martin. Subject completed secondary screening, now at Gate C12. Flight boards in 35 minutes. Gate C12. Vancouver, not Seattle. The distinction was important. It transformed a business trip into attempted flight, a professional conference into deliberate deception. Each element added weight to the case I'd built, converting suspicion into certainty, assumptions into evidence. As I approached the security checkpoint, I spotted a familiar face. Sandra Chen, TSA supervisor and former colleague from a joint banking security task force. Martin had obviously called in the right favor. Dan, she greeted me with a professional nod. Everything's arranged. Your person of interest is at the gate. Do you need an escort? Thanks, Sandra. I can manage from here. I appreciate the assistance. She handed me a temporary security badge. Just procedure. Return it on your way out. I clipped the badge to my lapel and moved through the expedited security lane, bypassing the lines of travelers removing shoes and laptops. The efficiency of the system I'd set in motion was almost artistic. Every component working precisely as intended, creating a seamless operation that would culminate in Rebecca's confrontation with reality. As I walked toward Concourse C, I mentally reviewed the evidence I had compiled. The financial trail was the foundation, the unauthorized transfer attempt, Rebecca's personal loan with its fabricated purpose, the maxed-out credit cards, the pattern of cash withdrawals. Solid, irrefutable proof of financial misconduct. But I'd gone further, building a comprehensive case that would leave no room for denials or alternative explanations. The travel documents showed clear intent to flee. One-way tickets to Vancouver, connecting to the Caymans, no return booking, scheduled departure timed perfectly to coincide with the expected transfer of funds. The real estate searches demonstrated planning for permanent relocation. The communications with Michael, though partially deleted, provided context and motive. Most damning were the timing elements. Rebecca had initiated the $50,000 transfer at 3:14 a.m., a time chosen specifically because she believed I would be asleep, unaware of the transaction until it was too late. She had created the fictitious Seattle conference's cover, carefully maintaining the charade up to and including our final dinner together. Every action showed premeditation, every decision revealed calculation. I documented all of it, creating a chronological reconstruction of her deception that was now securely saved in multiple locations. My personal records, the bank's security, files, and the USB drive in my pocket. Information that could, if necessary, be provided to law enforcement or used in divorce proceedings. But this wasn't just about legal consequences or financial protection. This was about truth, about forcing Rebecca to confront the reality of what she had done, not just to our finances, but to our marriage, to the life we had built together, to the trust I had placed in her. Gate C12 came into view, a predictable scene of travelers waiting for their boarding call. And there she was, Rebecca, seated near the boarding desk, dressed in travel attire I didn't recognize, new clothes for her new life. She was checking her phone repeatedly, her expression shifting between anxiety and frustration. Michael should have arrived by now. The boarding would begin soon. I stood observing her for a moment, struck by how familiar yet foreign she appeared. This was the woman I had woken up beside for 8 years, the person I had shared meals with, traveled with, planned a future with, and yet watching her now, she seemed like a stranger, someone capable of calculated betrayal, of elaborately planned deception. Taking a deep breath, I approached. She didn't notice me at first, still focused on her phone, likely texting Michael, demanding to know his whereabouts. When she finally looked up, the shock on her face was absolute, eyes widening, mouth opening slightly, color draining from her cheeks. "Dan," she managed, her voice barely audible. "What are you doing here?" I sat down beside her, placing my briefcase between us. "I thought I'd see you off," I replied calmly. "Though I was expecting Seattle, not Vancouver." Interesting change of plans. Her expression shifted rapidly, shock giving way to calculation as she searched for a plausible explanation. "Dude, there was a last-minute venue change. The conference was moved to Vancouver. I must have forgotten to mention it." "Interesting," I nodded. "And does this design conference typically include a connecting flight to Grand Cayman?" The color drained further from her face. Her hands, I noticed, had begun to tremble slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." I removed a printed itinerary from my briefcase. Her complete travel plans, including the connection to the Caymans. "Your entire route, Rebecca, paid for with your personal credit card, the same one you've been making cash advances on. One-way tickets, no return booking." She stared at the document, then at me, her facade cracking. How did I know?" I finished for her. "That's the question you should have asked yourself before you initiated a $50,000 transfer from our joint account at 3:14 in the morning. Before you created fake client meetings as cover for spending time with Michael Thornton. Before you planned an international escape funded with money that didn't belong to you." Rebecca's expression hardened, her initial shock giving way to defiance. "That money was as much mine as yours." "Perhaps," I acknowledged. "But the method matters, Rebecca. The deception matters. The deliberate attempt to drain our accounts without discussion or agreement, that matters." "You don't understand," she insisted, lowering her voice as nearby travelers glanced our way. Michael isn't coming," I interrupted flatly. She blinked, momentarily derailed. "What?" "He's not joining you. Not today, not tomorrow. He's currently in his office, probably contemplating how quickly his life unraveled this morning." Disbelief washed over her face. "You're lying. He'll be here." I removed my phone, pulled up my recent calls, and showed her the timestamp of my conversation with Michael from an hour earlier. He's made the reasonable decision to salvage what remains of his professional life rather than compound his existing licensing problems with federal financial crimes. The boarding announcement for Vancouver chimed overhead. Passengers began gathering their belongings, forming a line at the gate. Rebecca remained frozen in her seat, the reality of her situation finally beginning to register. "The money," she said quietly. "The transfer—" "Frozen," I confirmed, "as is Michael's account. At First Western, as is your personal loan. Every financial avenue you tried to create has been systematically closed." Her eyes narrowed, anger replacing shock. "You had no right to interfere in my personal accounts." "I had every right to protect joint assets from unauthorized removal," I countered evenly. "As for your personal accounts, I didn't freeze those. As your husband, I froze them as the Regional Security Director of Sentinel Financial, responding to suspicious activity patterns consistent with fraud." The second boarding call announced. More passengers moved toward the gate, leaving us increasingly isolated in the waiting area. "Why are you doing this?" Rebecca demanded, her voice a harsh whisper. "If you knew, why not just confront me? Why this performance?" "Because actions have consequences, Rebecca. Because you didn't just attempt to take money, you violated the foundation of trust our entire relationship was built upon. You lied repeatedly and elaborately, planning to disappear without so much as a goodbye." I removed a final document from my briefcase, a comprehensive timeline of her deception, meticulously constructed from the evidence I'd gathered. Bank records, phone records, travel documents, recovered emails, all organized chronologically to show the evolution of her betrayal. 4 months, I said, tapping the document. "That's how long you've been systematically dismantling our marriage while pretending everything was normal. 4 months of lies over dinner, fabricated client meetings, secret rendezvous with Michael. 4 months during which you made concrete plans to abandon our life together while smiling to my face and saying you loved me." Rebecca stared at the document, then at me, the weight of exposure visibly pressing down on her. The final boarding call announced, the last passengers shuffling toward the gate. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small. "Now you have a choice," I replied, closing my briefcase. "You can board that flight to Vancouver, alone, without Michael, without the money you were counting on. You can try to salvage whatever plan B you might create, or you can come home, face what you've done, and we'll figure out next steps properly." "There's nothing to salvage between us," she said, a hint of bitterness entering her tone. "Not after this." "Probably not," I agreed. "But there's a right way and a wrong way to end a marriage. Running away with stolen funds definitely qualifies as the wrong way." The gate agent made the final boarding announcement, eyeing us curiously as the last passengers presented their boarding passes. Rebecca looked toward the gate, then back at me. The calculation was visible in her expression, weighing options, considering alternatives, searching for an angle that might still work in her favor. "If I come back," she began carefully, "what exactly happens?" "We address this like adults," I replied. "I've protected our financial assets, but I'm not interested in leaving you destitute. We get lawyers, we divide things equitably, we go our separate ways with our dignity intact." She studied my face, perhaps looking for signs of deception or hidden agenda. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "And if I get on the plane? Then the evidence I've compiled goes to the appropriate authorities," I said simply. "Financial crimes aren't viewed favorably by the justice system, Rebecca, especially when they involve crossing international boundaries." The gate agent began closing the boarding door. "Final call for flight AC 8072 to Vancouver. Final boarding call." Rebecca closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with renewed clarity. 8 years of marriage had taught me to read her expressions, and I recognized the look of someone who had run out of moves. "I need my bag from the overhead," she said finally, standing up. "Tell them to wait." I nodded, remaining seated as she approached the gate agent, explaining she needed to retrieve her luggage. The agent looked annoyed, but picked up a phone to call the flight crew. As Rebecca disappeared down the jetway to collect her belongings, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. No triumph, no vindication, only the hollow certainty that the life we had built together was irrevocably shattered. The evidence had done its job, forcing a confrontation with reality that Rebecca couldn't evade or manipulate. The case was built, the truth exposed. Now came the aftermath. The drive home from the airport was excruciating in its silence. Rebecca sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, her recovered luggage in the trunk. The 10 miles between Portland International and our house might as well have been 1,000. I pulled into our driveway just after noon. The house looked exactly as we had left it that morning. My coffee cup still in the sink, her note about the Seattle conference still on the refrigerator. Small remnants of a shared life now shattered beyond repair. Rebecca moved to the living room without a word. Sitting rigidly on the edge of the sofa, I remained standing, my body tense with the conversation that could no longer be avoided. "So," she finally said, her voice surprisingly steady, "You've won. Congratulations. This isn't about winning, Rebecca, isn't it?" Her eyes flashed with sudden anger. "You tracked me, monitored my accounts, froze my assets, confronted Michael, ambushed me at the airport, all so you could stand there with that look of moral superiority. If that's not winning, what would you call it?" "I'd call it consequences," I replied evenly. "For actions you chose, repeatedly, deliberately," she laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "God, listen to yourself. Regional Security Director Daniel Mitchell, protecting the integrity of the financial system. Did you ever once, in all your meticulous investigation, ask yourself why I wanted to leave? You had numerous opportunities to tell me why," I pointed out. "Instead, you chose deception." "Because I knew exactly how you'd respond," she snapped, "with spreadsheets and rational arguments and practical solutions, everything in its proper place, every emotion neatly categorized and filed away." I felt my composure slipping. "What did you expect me to do when I discovered you were stealing our savings? Write you a poem?" "I expected nothing," Rebecca said, her voice dropping. "That's the point, Dan. I've expected nothing from you for years. Do you have any idea what it's like being married to someone who treats his marriage like another system to optimize? Who schedules date nights with the same enthusiasm he schedules dental appointments?" I stared at her, momentarily thrown by the shift in direction. "So this is my fault? Your affair, your theft, your elaborate escape plan, all because I'm not spontaneous enough?" "It's not about spontaneity," she sighed, suddenly looking exhausted. "It's about connection, about feeling seen for who I am, not just what I contribute to your perfectly ordered life. Michael may be many things, but when he looks at me, he actually sees me. And that justifies stealing $50,000, I asked incredulously. "No," she admitted, meeting my gaze directly. "That was wrong. I won't defend it. But the money was a means to an end, not the point." "Enlighten me, then," I said, crossing my arms. "What was the point?" Rebecca looked around our living room, at the carefully selected furniture, the symmetrically arranged photos, the tasteful but impersonal decor. "Freedom," she said simply. "From this mausoleum of a marriage, from going through the motions for another 20 years until we wake up as strangers who can't remember why we chose each other." Her words hit with unexpected force. I sat down across from her, trying to process what she was saying beneath the anger and justification. "If you were that unhappy, why not just ask for a divorce? Would you have really made it that simple?" she challenged. "Or would you have turned it into another project to manage, with counseling schedules and relationship improvement metrics?" I wanted a clean break, a fresh start. With my money, I added pointedly. With half of our money, she corrected. The transfer was excessive, I admit that. I panicked when the first attempts didn't go through. But I wasn't trying to bankrupt you. I leaned forward, hands clasped between my knees. You realize how difficult it is to believe anything you say right now. You've been lying to me for months. Yes, she acknowledged with surprising candor. I have, and I'm sorry for that part, truly. But I'm not sorry for wanting something different than this carefully controlled existence. The room fell silent. As we regarded each other across the coffee table, two people who had shared a bed, a home, a life, now separated by a chasm of broken trust and conflicting narratives. What happens now? Rebecca finally asked. Legally, we get attorneys, divide assets fairly, file for divorce. I've already secured our finances, but I'm not interested in leaving you with nothing. Just like that. Efficient to the end. What? Would you prefer, Rebecca? Drama? Recriminations? I've had my fill of those already. She looked away, blinking rapidly. I don't know what I expected. Michael's gone, isn't he? Really gone. He made his choice when faced with consequences. I confirmed, though in fairness, I didn't give him much of an alternative. A single tear tracked down her cheek, which she quickly wiped away. 8 years, she whispered. How did we get here? The question hung between us. Sincere despite everything, raising complexities neither of us was ready to fully confront. In that moment, behind the anger and betrayal, I glimpsed something unexpected, genuine grief for what had been lost, not just today, but gradually, imperceptibly, over years of disconnection. I don't know, I admitted finally. But we are here, and we can't go back. Rebecca nodded slowly, acceptance settling over her features. I'll pack some things, stay at a hotel tonight. You don't have to leave immediately. Yes, she interrupted gently. I do, for both our sakes. She stood, smoothing her travel clothes with shaking hands. I assume my credit cards are still functional for a hotel room, or should I start selling jewelry? Despite everything, I found myself almost smiling at her characteristic sharpness. Your personal cards are fine. I only froze the joint accounts and the suspicious transfers. Ever the reasonable one, she murmured, heading toward the stairs. She paused at the bottom step, turning back to me. For what it's worth, I didn't hate every minute of our marriage. There were good years. I know, I replied softly. That's what makes this harder. She nodded once, then climbed the stairs, leaving me alone with the wreckage of our confrontation and the strange, hollow feeling of a victory that brought no satisfaction, only the certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. I sat in the living room, listening to Rebecca move around upstairs. The sounds were painfully familiar, drawers opening and closing, hangers sliding across closet, rods, the soft thud of a suitcase being filled. The soundtrack of departure, of endings. An hour passed before she descended the stairs, now dressed in jeans and a simple blouse, pulling a large suitcase and carrying a small duffel bag. Gone was the polished, confident woman who had planned an international escape. In her place stood someone more vulnerable, more human. I've taken only what's unquestionably mine, she said, setting the bags by the door. Personal items, clothes, a few pieces of jewelry that were gifts from my parents. The rest we can sort out later through proper channels. Her careful consideration caught me off guard. I had expected anger, perhaps desperation, not this composed practicality. That's reasonable, I acknowledged, standing. Do you need help getting these to your car? I called a ride share. It should be here in a few minutes. She glanced around the living room, her expression unreadable. I left my keys on the kitchen counter. House, car, mailbox, all of them. The finality of the gesture wasn't lost on me. For 8 years, those keys had represented our shared life, our mutual trust and access. Their surrender marked a definitive ending. "Where will you go?" I asked, surprising myself with how much I still cared about the answer. "The Kimpton downtown for now, until I figure out next steps." She hesitated. "I assume my design business accounts are still accessible. I'll need to support myself." I only secured our personal finances and blocked the suspicious transfers. I assured her, "Your legitimate business accounts were never in question." Rebecca nodded, seemingly relieved. "At least I still have that." An awkward silence fell between us, filled with unasked questions and unspoken recriminations. Just days ago, we would have known how to navigate such moments, with a joke, a touch, the shorthand of long intimacy. Now we stood as strangers, the familiar scripts erased by betrayal and exposure. "You know," Rebecca said finally, "for someone so observant, so meticulous about security protocols and suspicious activities, you missed all the warning signs in your own marriage." The observation stung with its accuracy. Perhaps I wasn't looking for threats at home. Or perhaps you were too busy protecting everyone else's assets to notice your own were at risk. Her tone wasn't accusatory, merely reflective. We both failed Dan, in different ways, but equally. Before I could respond, her phone chimed, the rideshare arriving. She picked up her bags, but I stepped forward, taking the larger suitcase. "Let me help you with this, at least." She didn't protest as we walked to the waiting car. The driver, sensing the tension, remained silent as he opened the trunk. I placed her suitcase inside, then stepped back as Rebecca handed him the duffel bag. "I'll have my lawyer contact you next week," she said, turning to me one last time. "All right." She hesitated as if there were more to say, then simply nodded and got into the car. I watched as it pulled away, carrying my wife of 8 years toward a future separate from mine. The sensation was surreal, like watching the conclusion of a story I had been reading rather than living. Back inside, the house felt cavernous, echoing with absence. Rebecca's perfume lingered in the air. Her half-empty coffee cup still sat on the side table. Her gardening magazine remained splayed, open on the ottoman, physical remnants of a presence now withdrawn. I moved through the rooms, cataloguing the subtle changes. Her laptop gone from the desk, the bathroom counter missing her array of cosmetics, the closet half empty, her clothes no longer crowding mine on the rod. Small subtractions that collectively transformed our home into something different, no longer ours, not quite mine. In the kitchen, her keys gleamed on the counter, arranged in a neat row. House, car, mailbox. I picked them up, feeling their weight in my palm. So small, yet so symbolic of the trust now irrevocably broken. My phone rang. Valerie from legal at Sentinel Financial. "Dan, just checking in. How did everything go?" I stared at Rebecca's keys, still in my hand. "It's over, she's gone." "I'm sorry," Valerie said, genuine compassion in her voice. "Professionally speaking, do we need to maintain the security holds?" An important question. Despite everything, did I still consider Rebecca a financial threat? Keep them active for now, but reduce the restriction level, I decided. Allow normal transactions, but flag anything unusual. I don't think she'll try anything else, but trust needs to be earned back, Valerie finished. "Understood. And personally, Dan, are you all right?" I searched for the right word. "Processing. It's been an intense few days. Take whatever time you need. Your team can handle things for a while." After ending the call, I wandered back to the living room, sitting heavily on the couch. The confrontation had changed something fundamental, not just between Rebecca and me, but within myself. For days, I had operated in security director mode, identifying the threat, gathering evidence, implementing countermeasures. That clarity of purpose had carried me through the shock and pain of betrayal. Now, with Rebecca gone and the immediate crisis averted, different emotions began to surface. Anger, certainly, grief for what had been lost, but also, unexpectedly, relief. The exhausting vigilance of the past days, the constant calculation, the performance of normalcy, could finally end. And beneath it all, a question Rebecca had raised that I couldn't easily dismiss. Had I treated our marriage like another system to optimize? Had my professional focus on security and control seeped into our personal relationship, creating the very disconnection that made her vulnerable to Michael's attention? I wasn't ready to absolve Rebecca of responsibility for her choices. The deception, the financial maneuvers, the planned abandonment, these were deliberate acts that couldn't be justified by marital dissatisfaction. Yet I couldn't ignore the possibility that I had contributed to the conditions that made such choices seem reasonable to her. My phone chimed with an email notification. It was from Rebecca, sent from her personal account. Dan, I've notified my current clients that I'll be taking a brief hiatus due to personal matters. Most projects are at natural pause points, and the few that aren't can wait a week or two. I've also left the design firm's financial records on my desktop computer in the home office. Everything is organized and up to date. You always appreciated thoroughness. I don't expect forgiveness, nor am I offering excuses. What I did was wrong, not just the financial aspects, but the deception itself. You deserved better, regardless of our other issues. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for how I chose to end things. Not for wanting to end them. I think we both know this has been coming for longer than either of us wanted to admit. But for the method, there were more honorable paths I could have taken. Rebecca, her email reflected the shift that had occurred during our confrontation. Gone was the desperate woman attempting escape, replaced by someone taking responsibility, however, belatedly for her actions. There was dignity in her acknowledgement, a clarity that suggested she, too, was emerging from a fog of justification and self-deception. I didn't respond immediately. Some communications deserve the respect of reflection, of measured response rather than reactive reply. Instead, I poured myself a glass of the Barolo we had opened just last night, a lifetime ago, and stepped out onto the back deck. The autumn afternoon was crisp and clear, the maple trees in our yard ablaze with red and gold. The garden Rebecca had carefully tended showed signs of seasonal transition, summer blooms fading, fall plantings emerging, life continuing its cycle despite human drama. I considered the power shift that had occurred. Days ago, Rebecca had held what she believed was the advantage: secret plans, financial preparations, the element of surprise. I had responded by asserting control through my professional expertise, systematically dismantling her escape route, confronting her with irrefutable evidence. Now, unexpectedly, we had arrived at something more balanced. The deception exposed, the escape thwarted, we were left with the simple, devastating truth. Our marriage was over. Not because of financial machinations or security protocols, but because the connection between us had failed in ways neither of us had fully recognized until forced to confront it. In this new reality, power games seemed suddenly irrelevant. What remained was the shared task of untangling two lives with minimal additional damage, a process that would require cooperation rather than competition, honesty rather than manipulation. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, I realized that despite everything, I felt strangely unburdened. The worst had happened. The betrayal I had feared had materialized, been confronted, and survived. What lay ahead was difficult but navigable. The practical dismantling of a shared life, the emotional processing of loss. I raised my glass to the fading light, a solitary toast to endings and beginnings, to truth finally spoken, to the strange relief that comes when pretense falls away, and reality, however painful, stands revealed. The weeks following Rebecca's departure unfolded with a strange mixture of bureaucratic tedium and emotional revelation. The practical dismantling of an 8-year marriage required attention to countless details, yet amid these mechanical tasks, deeper truths continued to emerge. 3 days after our confrontation, I received an unexpected call from Michael Thornton. "Mitchell," he began without preamble, "I'm not calling to make excuses. I just thought you should know that the licensing board ruled on my case yesterday." And I hadn't anticipated hearing from him again. 6-month suspension, mandatory ethics, courses and supervised practice for a year after reinstatement. His voice was flat, resigned. "Could have been worse. Why are you telling me this?" A pause. "Because you had every right to report me for the financial issues too. You didn't. I want to acknowledge that. The call left me unsettled. I had been so focused on Rebecca's betrayal that I had given relatively little thought to Michael beyond his role in her plans. A week later, I met with Rebecca and our respective attorneys. She looked composed in a simple navy suit, though shadows beneath her eyes suggested she wasn't sleeping well. The meeting was surprisingly productive. Rebecca had come prepared with a fair proposal for division of assets. The house would be sold, proceeds split equitably, retirement accounts divided according to standard formulas. Ms. Mitchell has also prepared documentation of the attempted transfer and subsequent financial activities," her attorney added, sliding a folder across the table. "She wishes to acknowledge these actions formally." I glanced at Rebecca, surprised by this voluntary disclosure. She met my gaze briefly, then looked away. When we were alone after the meeting, Rebecca seemed suddenly uncertain, her professional composure wavering. "I wanted to tell you that I've been seeing a therapist," she said, "trying to understand why I made the choices I did. I wasn't sure how to respond." "That sounds constructive." "I also wanted you to know that Michael and I are not together." "That ended the day you confronted him." "I assumed as much," I replied carefully. "Though it's not really my concern anymore." "No, it isn't," she acknowledged. "But I thought it might matter to know that I'm not simply continuing with Plan B, that I'm actually facing consequences." Something in her vulnerability reached past my defenses. "For what it's worth, I've been doing some reflecting too, about my role in how we drifted apart." A small, sad smile crossed her face. "Maybe someday we can have that conversation. Not today, but someday." That evening I authorized lifting the remaining financial restrictions on Rebecca's accounts. The threat had passed. Maintaining the holds now would be punitive rather than protective. A month after our separation, Rebecca came to the house to collect some remaining belongings. As she prepared to leave, she noticed a box of mementos I had set aside for her. Photographs from our early years together, concert tickets, travel souvenirs. "You kept these?" she asked, surprise evident in her voice. "They're part of your history." "Too," I replied. "I thought you might want them." She lifted a photo from the top, us on the Oregon coast, windblown and laughing, from the weekend I had proposed. "We were happy then, weren't we? That wasn't an illusion." "No," I said quietly. "That was real. Whatever happened after doesn't erase that." Rebecca studied my face. "You've changed." "Betrayal tends to have that effect," I observed, but without the bitterness that would have colored the same words weeks earlier. "Not just that," she shook her head. "You're more present. Even now, when we're ending things, you seem more engaged than you have in years." Her observation startled me with its accuracy. The crisis had indeed forced a kind of presence, an awakening from the automatic patterns that had governed our relationship. "Maybe we both needed this," I suggested. "Not the way it happened, but the wake-up call." As she left with the box of memories tucked under her arm, I felt a sense of completion. The consequences had been delivered, not through my orchestration of punishment, but through the natural results of her actions. The relationship was over. Trust was broken. A new life had to be constructed from the fragments of the old. Yet, there was dignity in how we were concluding things, a mutual recognition that extracting maximum pain would serve neither of us. Rebecca was facing her consequences daily, rebuilding from a foundation of acknowledged mistake rather than successful deception. 6 months later, I stood in the empty house that had once been our home, conducting a final walkthrough before the new owners took possession. The rooms echoed with my footsteps, stripped of furniture and memories, ready for someone else's story to begin. The sale had gone smoothly. A young couple with a baby on the way, excited to make the space their own. To them, it was simply the beginning of their family's journey, untainted by the ending of mine. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier, the settlement proceeding exactly as we had negotiated. No last-minute demands, no emotional ambushes, just the legal conclusion of a relationship that had already ended in all the ways that mattered. As I closed the front door for the final time and handed the keys to the waiting real estate agent, I felt a surprising sense of lightness. The house had been the last tangible connection binding Rebecca and me together. With its sale, the practical dismantling of our marriage was complete. I drove to my new apartment in a renovated warehouse. Downtown, a space entirely of my choosing, reflecting preferences I had compromised on during my marriage. The transformation of my living space mirrored the internal changes of the past months. Through therapy, I had begun to understand how my approach to relationships had been shaped by the same instincts that made me effective at work. The desire for control, the preference for systems over spontaneity, the tendency to optimize rather than experience. My phone chimed with an email notification as I settled onto my balcony. It was from Rebecca, the first personal rather than practical communication in months. Dan, I heard the house closing went through today. I wanted to reach out, not to reopen old wounds, but to share something I've realized during these months of reflection. When we met, what attracted me to you was your stability, your thoughtfulness, your ability to create order from chaos. These were qualities I admired, that I lacked in myself. Over time, I began to resent those same traits, not because they changed, but because I did. That doesn't justify what I did. Nothing could. But understanding it has helped me move forward in a way that might prevent similar mistakes in the future. I hope you're finding your way toward whatever comes next, as I'm trying to do. Rebecca. I read the message twice, struck by its undefended honesty. After consideration, I replied, Rebecca, your insights mirror realizations I've had from the other side. I've valued your spontaneity, your emotional intelligence, your ease with people, then gradually retreated from those qualities rather than learning from them. We had complementary strengths that could have balanced each other. Instead, we allowed them to become opposing forces. I'm doing well. The new place suits me, and I'm learning to pay attention to aspects of life I previously overlooked. Not just analyzing experiences, but actually having them. I wish you well in whatever comes next. Dan, the following week, Martin Winters, the bank's chief of corporate security, announced his retirement and suggested I consider applying for his position. The experience with Rebecca gave you something crucial for this role, he observed. You've seen firsthand how financial security isn't just about systems and protocols. It's about understanding human motivation, the complex reasons people make poor decisions. I considered his perspective. I've definitely developed a more nuanced view of financial vulnerability. Exactly, Martin nodded. You've always been excellent at the technical aspects. Now you have the human insight to match. The opportunity felt right, a chance to bring my expanded perspective to a role where it could benefit others. I submitted my application that afternoon. 2 months later, sitting in my new office as Chief of Corporate Security, I received an unexpected delivery. a small package with no return address. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a brief note in familiar handwriting. What I took wasn't just money. It was trust, respect, and the foundation of our relationship. The money I can return, the rest I can only acknowledge owing. Shrai stared at the check, understanding its significance beyond the monetary value. Rebecca was making amends the only way she knew how, returning what she had attempted to take, not because she had to, but because she chose to. After careful consideration, I deposited the check into a charitable foundation supporting financial literacy education. Some debts can't be repaid directly. They can only be transformed into something constructive. That evening, watching the sunset from my balcony, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. Rebecca's betrayal had shattered the life I thought I had, forcing me to rebuild from the foundations. The process had been painful, disorienting, at times seemingly impossible. Yet it had also been clarifying, revealing truths about myself and my relationships that comfort had allowed me to ignore. I had learned that security isn't just about systems and controls. It's about awareness, adaptability, and acknowledging vulnerability rather than denying it. That relationships require presence, not just procedures. That even betrayal can become a catalyst for growth if we allow the pain to teach rather than simply harden us. Most importantly, I had learned that some things can't be secured against loss. They must be risked, experienced, valued for their very impermanence. Love, trust, connection. These aren't assets to be protected, but experiences to be embraced, with all their inherent uncertainty. As the last light faded from the sky, I raised my glass in a solitary toast, not to victory or vindication, but to the unexpected wisdom that can emerge from our most painful mistakes. To the revelation that sometimes, when we lose what we thought we wanted, we find what we truly need. Rebecca had transferred $50,000 to her lover from our joint account, forgetting who controlled the bank. But in doing so, she had inadvertently transferred something more valuable to me, the opportunity to rediscover who I was beyond the systems I had built to protect myself, and the courage to live more authentically in their absence. For that unexpected gift, despite everything, I was finally able to feel a measure of gratitude. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.